Today in Nerd History!
December 3rd, 1994 was the release of the original Sony PlayStation, a console that almost didn't exist, but whose creation changed the landscape of video games forever. So in honor of the mighty gray beast, let's take a look at the 9 coolest things about the Sony PlayStation. Number 1, it was almost the Nintendo PlayStation. Sony never intended to throw their hat into the console ring. They'd started in games as a producer of sound chips for Nintendo, but in 1988, they partnered with Nintendo to make a CD-based extension for the Super Nintendo. Right at the last minute, Nintendo decided it would be much funnier to make a really bad product instead and switched contractors from Sony to Philips. And in a glorious swoop of instant karma, their deal with Philips tanked. The only thing that resulted from the Philips partnership is the Nintendo CDI games, which Nintendo refuses to even acknowledge exist.
This is awful! Know what I mean?
As a result of that, Nintendo wouldn't see optical media in their consoles for over a decade. Number 2, it was almost the Sega PlayStation. With Nintendo inadvertently crippled, Sony's next partner turned accidental target was the other 90s console giant, Sega. Sony tried to sell their CD-based hardware to Big Blue, and even went so far to invest in a developer called Digital Pictures. When Sega decided to pursue the Sega CD for Genesis on their own, the deal with Sony fell through, and almost instantly, Sega found themselves hounded by Congress for the content of one of their Sega CD games, Night Trap, a game that was produced by a Sony-funded Digital Pictures. Sony's accidental humiliation of Sega didn't stop there. When Sony's independently produced PlayStation was preparing for launch, Sega was gearing the release of the Sega Saturn. And at E3, when it was revealed that Sega's console would cost $100 more than the PlayStation, it tanked at launch. Sound familiar? Number 3, the original mascot for the PlayStation was a terrifying monster. Originally, the PlayStation was going to have a nightmarish mascot called Polygon Man to show off the console's 3D capabilities. But after Sony Computer Entertainment CEO Ken Kutaragi saw the Lawnmower Man-looking abomination, he had it taken out to the car park and quietly shot. It took Sony nearly 2 decades before they cheekily introduced Polygon Man as a boss character in Sony PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. Number 4, Spyro and Crash Bandicoot look completely different in Japan. Believe it or not, both Spyro the Dragon and Crash Bandicoot were deemed too gritty and aggressive for Japanese audiences. So for the Japanese releases, they were given a cute anime makeover. So kawaii. Kawaii as hell. I want to take them home and make them date. Number 5, the buttons on the PlayStation controller actually mean things. PlayStation designer Taiyu Goto had originally intended for the controller's buttons to correspond to player actions, such as yes, no, menu, and the player's viewpoint. Now they basically just serve to make cheat codes really complicated to read online. Number 6, the PlayStation was the first console to sell over 100 million units. No console of its generation even came close to selling as many units as the PlayStation. The only full-size console to beat it out was the PlayStation 2, which moved over 155 million units. That's enough PlayStation 2s to give one to everyone in Japan, in Norway, and Jamaica, and the island kingdom of Tonga, and to feed every blue whale on the planet for 10 years, supposing that they eat PlayStation 2s, which they may only eat PlayStation 1s, I'll have to check on that. Number 7, there were 2,418 games produced for the PlayStation 1, and only about half of those games were ever released in the US. One of the rarest and most expensive is the Elemental Gearbolt Assassin case, which sells in upwards of $3,000. It comes with a gold light gun, a memory card, and the indignity of spending $3,000 on a game that kind of blows. Number 8, PlayStation CDs were black because it looked cool. Some speculate it might have been a form of copy protection, but more than likely it was just an easy way to identify bootleg discs. And 2 games share the title of having the most discs for a PlayStation game. Riven, the sequel to Myst, filled 5 discs with esoteric spooky puzzles. And the Japanese dating simulation Tokimeki Memorial 2 filled 5 discs with the ability to have the virtual girls pronounce the player's name. Everything you need to date your console. And number 9, as in the 90s, as in PlayStation's advertisements were the most 90s thing you've ever seen.
Not ready.
Pretty raw, pretty dated, but luckily there's nothing embarrassing about PlayStation's commercials now.
In your bedroom under the blankets. Or perhaps you prefer the kitchen. Or on the toilet. Or do you like it out in the garden? You could even join me.
Haha, oh.